So I wanted to move on to discuss the film you have chosen as your favourite, which is, after some discussion between us, we went for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974.
Yeah.
The first question I always like to ask in this sort of section is, how did you first come across the film, and what was it that made it special on that first viewing?
What made it special for me was that I couldn't get through it the first viewing. It took a couple of viewings. I think I was in my early 20s when I first watched it, and I rented the video and I put it in the machine because I had been hearing about it, and I couldn't watch it all the way through. It took me about a week. I would watch little bits of it, and then I finished it, and it gave me nightmares for a long time afterwards. I mean, I was just afraid of the dark and afraid to go to sleep, and it was a pretty intense watch for me. And because it was shot in 16 millimeter, it just feels like it's a home movie. It feels really real, and and there's no blood, very much blood in it. It's just all the scares and all the tension, and the poor character, Sally Hardesty, what she went through. It's unrelenting. And also that fixated mask that Gunnar Hansen had on his face. The whole thing was just so chilling. And funny too, that, number of years after I saw that movie, I was probably in my mid 30s. I did my very first ever horror movie convention. And I was living in New York City at the time, and I was working on a soap opera, a nice, sweet soap opera. And somebody called me to do a convention in New Jersey. And so I went across the bridge, and I showed up on that Friday night. I'd never been to a horror movie convention in my life. And they sit me next to Gunnar Hansen. And I was like, holy crap, this is Leatherface. I'm sitting next to Leatherface. This is insane. And because I'd never been to one of these things before, Gunnar had been to a bunch of them, and he was showing me how to put my pictures out and explaining to me that, you shake people's hand, you talk to them, you give an autograph, they give you a little bit of money for it. And I sat next to him for the whole weekend, and we became great friends. And
there's not many people that could say they were friends with Leatherface.
Oh my God. And we exchanged emails and phone numbers, and through the years we kept in touch. And he passed away, recently, as everybody knows. And I was really sad to see him go. But that man and that performance, what is probably the single most scary horror performance of anybody under a mask, to me, that scares me the most still to this day.
It's truly
chilling.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's and it's one of those films, and I'm sure you've done films like this yourselves, where the restrictions on it make the film better. The lack of budget that Tobe Hooper had on this film, I think that's why because it feels almost cheap, but that makes it real. Like you can you watch that film and you can feel the heat and the smell almost watching it.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And we had the same production designer on Reanimator as on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre too. Yeah. So that I'm glad that have a little bit of the Texas Chainsaw legacy in my canon as well.
And yeah. I think the point you made earlier is really interesting. The point that it's not got that much blood in, and you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a film that everyone who has seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remembers it being more violent than it actually is.
Well, it's pretty violent. I think it's violent, but I just don't think it's bloody. I mean, the girl on the meat hook. Right? Everybody thinks about that and remembers that. Every time that scene comes on, and I've probably watched the movie 10 times in my life now, It's unreal. It just feels like it's really happening. And I think you're right because of the cheapness of the way it was shot and the low budget and all of that. I mean, that definitely adds to the allure of the movie. And that first scene, one of those, is that the first scene, when they pick up the hitchhiker, they pick up Edwin Neal and, he's in the van with them. And, it's just, everything about that film is amazing. The dinner scene, it's just like so freaky. It's kind of unrelenting, the whole way through.
Yeah, it's difficult to know where to begin with that dinner scene, really, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
so intense from start to finish.
Yeah. And it's funny because a lot of people, when they talk about the final girls and whatever, they talk about Marilyn Burns' performance, and she does a lot of screaming in the movie. And a lot of people are a little adverse to that in a way, or they talk about that sometimes as being, a little over the top. But I believe her performance so much because if that was happening to me, I'd be screaming too. I'd be screaming the whole way through. It's just, it's insane. It's an insane movie. Nobody, you just can't recreate that today. It just felt so real. It just was intense. I love that movie.
Yeah, that's it. It does feel real. I think that even that the opening on screen text and the voiceover, pretending that it's real, even that, that sort of device, like if you did it in a film today, it would feel kind of hokey and wouldn't quite work. But there's something about it in Texas Chainsaw that even watching it now feels really authentic, and it really, makes you off balance and scared before the film's even started.
Yeah, I mean, and the nice thing about it too is that they didn't know that they were making a great film, and everybody, the performances, they're so invested. Nobody's winking at the audience, which, came in the 80s. Even Reanimator's a little winky at the audience, but there's no winking going on. Everybody's so intense and so into what's happening in the film. You just really feel those performances on a deep, deep level. The villains and the victims. Everybody is so intense. It's so real and authentic.
And do you, how much of that, as someone with experience of sets, how much of that do you think comes from how real, the set was? They were uncomfortable. They were hot. They were,
right, they were
struggling.
Right, that's what we've all read about it, right? That it was 110 degrees or something.
Yeah.
They were miserable, and they were just playing the reality of that. Yeah, right? I mean, uncomfortable conditions for the film, and they had very little money, and and just hot Texas day, right?
And do you think that really does play into it? I mean, for yourself, do you find that the atmosphere really helps like that?
You have to use whatever you need to use, and if that's available to you, yes, you have to use that. I'm writing a column for Fangoria Magazine now, which is the magazine has been rebooted by Dallas Sonye, who's the producer of Puppet Master. And in the recent issue of it, I interviewed some actors and some directors, and talking about the different ways that actors and directors collaborate, and if the director takes his cues from the actor takes their cues from the director, and how that process works on set. And one of the girls that I interviewed, you guys probably are not familiar with her, but her name is Martha Higuerita. She's a Mexican actress, quite famous in Mexico, and I did a Hulu Into the Dark movie with her that's coming out this summer. Anyway, she had to do a scene with somebody, and it was a close-up on her, and it was on the opposite side of a door, and she had to be talking to somebody through a door. And the actor who was playing opposite her wasn't available for her close-up for whatever reason. And she was having a really hard time coming up with, just reacting to somebody who's on set, who's probably the script supervisor reading the lines. And And so she was very frustrated. So the director said to her, use your frustration that you can't connect with the person that you're trying to connect with on the other side of the door in the scene. Use the frustration that you're having right now in this moment as Martha being the person who's having difficulty acting, and put that into your character. And we do stuff like that all the time. And she said that worked for her, So you can never dismiss really, I think, what's going on set as an actor and as a performer. That's why, magic happens sometimes with certain films, whether you have terrible conditions like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or sometimes you have really great conditions. I prefer personally to work under great conditions where I'm really supported and things feel wonderful. But I mean, I've definitely been on sets before where I've had to use what's going on in the day. I mean, you can't deny what's going on with you internally as a person when you're acting. So, it's quite an interesting process being on set and using those things. But you have to make everything a positive and make it work for you. You can't have it be a negative. So you have to find a way to make whatever the uncomfortable conditions or temperature is or whatever, and use it in a positive way while you're acting.
Absolutely. And so for me, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is genuinely still one of the scariest films ever made.
I agree.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that something you still feel, even though, to an extent, you kind of know how the sausage is made when it comes to horror?
Yeah, because I'm a good audience member too, even though I know how things are made. If a filmmaker is really good at their job, it affects me as much as it affects anyone. I mean, when I watch a movie, I'll sort of break it down for myself and I'll see things maybe that other people might not see. But I'm still affected by the scares and by the tension and by the love of a character that I want to survive or someone who's in peril. It really affects me. I'm very jumpy when I watch films with my family. I'm very vocal and jumpy, and I grab onto people who are sitting next to me. Yeah.
Well, that's good. I mean, that's very much how you want to be. I think there's no point being in the film industry unless you're a fan as well.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to sit there and just analyze it all and not be affected by it. I love movies just as an audience member myself. I love to be affected by film. I love to be scared. I love to feel, love and emotion and sadness. And I love to feel it all because, often in life we don't allow ourselves to feel the things that are going on inside of us. But when you're watching a movie, you can do that. You give yourself permission.
Definitely, and that's, I think, a good point on which to leave the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. My final question is always, if you hadn't chosen that, what other films could you have chosen to talk about?
Well, when you first asked me the question, my thought immediately went to the Robert Altman film, Three Women. I really love that movie, but it's not a horror movie. So we picked the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but I love the film Three Women, and it's three aspects of three different women and where they are in their lives and through the whole film. Have you seen that movie ever?
No, I haven't actually.
Yeah. Okay. So they sort of come together and coalesce at the end and sort of make one being. It's really arty and cool, but the story's very interesting and it's very unique. And actually, it really holds up. Today. I recommend that movie if you haven't seen it. And another horror movie that I really like is and Shelley Duvall was in that movie, and Shelley Duvall is also in The Shining. That's another favorite of mine.
Yeah,
that's a horror film.
An absolute classic. I don't think anyone would.
Yeah,
the interesting thing is in the UK at the moment, the BFI is just starting doing a Kubrick season, So I imagine they'll be screening The Shining. They've just re-released The Clockwork Orange in UK
Nice,
cinemas this
yeah.
week, which is a favourite of mine. So
Right, me too. Yeah, that had quite an effect on me when I first saw that.
Yeah.
I saw that when it first came out, and wow, I'd never seen anything like it when that movie came out.
Yeah, because of course it wasn't available in the UK for decades.
Oh.
So like,
I didn't know that.
So all over the world it was available after it came out, but Kubrick himself pulled it from release in the UK because there was all sorts of stuff about copycat crimes and things like that.
Oh.
So it wasn't released in the UK until after Kubrick passed away.
Very interesting. Oh, cool. Well,
there you go.
Great. Yeah.
Fun.
The more you know.
That's it. Trivia facts
trivia
on which to end the podcast.
Amazing. You learn trivia when you do a podcast.
That's it. It hasn't been a complete waste of everyone's time. It's always good to know.
Yeah.
Well, it is, Barbara, it's been absolutely fantastic to chat to you, and I would urge everyone to check out Puppet Master when it comes out.
Thank you so much. Take care.